In this video, I'm going to share with you how I make two small boxes out of this beautiful English walnut. So this log of English walnut grew in the client's garden, a lot of sentimental value linked with the family, and so when you have a tree that the client has provided, it's very different to if you source the timber yourself. Because obviously, you know, if you mess up or if it doesn't go well, then you can't simply go and get some more. So that does make the job much more challenging, and the selection process, which is always quite a lengthy one for me, is heightened because the stakes are so much higher. But I do really enjoy that as a challenge. Now with English walnut, the sapwood, as you can see, is like a pale creamy colour. And I find it's very attractive next to the richer heartwood. So I like to try and make this a feature wherever possible. I particularly like how the patterning between the heart and the sap can vary so much. The small tree was taken down due to honey fungus many years ago, and was planked and then has been air drying since then. So very nice stable timber. Obviously, because it's a small tree, there's a lot more sap in proportion to the heartwood. Now, technically speaking, traditional cabinet makers would say, well, you only use the heartwood, you don't use the sap. That wouldn't be realistic with a small tree like this, and you'd essentially not be able to use it. I'd much rather look at it as a very valuable resource, and how do we get the most out of it whilst making the biggest feature out of the beauty of the heart and sap as we can. The way I've approached the lids for these two boxes is that I took two consecutive planks from the log and then chose a section of the figuring that I particularly liked, and then was able to book match that. So you can see that here. And I particularly liked the sap next to the sap with the join, which gave you this kind of diamond shape in the center. And it also allowed for having the heartwood around the perimeter. Once the initial machining has all been done, I then move over to the hand plane to shoot the edges in by hand. I slightly hollow the boards in their length, and here you can just see I'm testing that by slightly clamping the middle of the board and then checking that the two ends are under compression, and this I find gives the very best and thinnest glue join, so that hopefully you hardly notice the glue join at all. When you're gluing the panels up, you're looking to get a nice even pressure both above and below the boards, which helps to ensure that the board is flat whilst the glue is drying. Once the lids and the bases have been glued up, they're left overnight in a warm, dry area. For the sides of the boxes, I was able to get the 4 sides per box out of one length of timber, and that means that the figuring can then run all the way around the box. To make a feature out of the fact that this was from a small tree, I wanted to centre the heartwood to each side of the box, which would allow some sap to run both along the top and the bottom edge, which would contrast against the base and the lid. Once all the sanding on the insides of the boxes has been completed, I then oil the insides. Now I'm using Odie's dark wood butter here. I could have done this after the boxes were glued up, but I felt like it would be easier if I did the oiling first. As the boxes are quite simple in design and veering on the side of being rustic, I definitely didn't want to have mitered corners, and I wanted to be able to seal some of the end grain on the sides. So I chose lapped joints, nice and simple but still strong, and a nice large gluing area. So I'm using band clamps to clamp them up, and then obviously checking for square and that there's no wind. So after the lids and bases have been taken out of clamp, I then cut them to size on the dimension saw. I'm cutting them around 1/2 mil larger than the overall sizes of the boxes. Then I belt sand to get the joins flush and to make sure that they're flat. And then I put a rebate both on the lids and the bases using the spindle moulder. I'm doing that for visual reasons, but also as a location point for the lids. Another design detail here, I'm putting a bevel on the inside edge of both the lids and the bases. I then finish off the bevels using the hand plane. Next is attaching the bearers to the undersides of the lids. So I'm gluing the middle third, I'm screwing the bearers down, but I've allowed a slight slot in the holes at the far ends of the bearers to allow the lids to either contract or expand. So this is why I cut the lids and the bases about 1/2 mil oversize, so that when I got to this stage I could then sand them down using the belt sander to be flush with the outside of the sides. Now it might seem a bit extreme to use a belt sander for this purpose, but the thing is I'm using 220 grit belts on here, and that essentially slows the process down, which makes it safer to get to the desired results without overdoing it. I find it works really well. So then it's on to using the shoulder plane to clean up the rebates from the spindle moulding. So getting rid of any burn marks and making sure that at the corners the rebate is flush. And then really finely set, I'm then just adjusting the edge of that rebate where it sits in against the inside edge of the box, and this is where I'm trying to get that nice snug fit, and I'm also putting a very slight taper on here to blend in with the taper on the bearers. So here you can see I'm just trying to see how tight it is, turning it round and checking it the other way. And then here, importantly, I'm checking to see how much play have I got, so that if the lid and the base does want to expand, then it can do so. So next it's on to putting a small bevel around the edges. I'm using the jack plane here. Now I could use a palm router and a chamfer cutter for this purpose, but I much prefer to do it by hand. I think you get a much nicer, more tactile result. Then I just go over the hand bevels with very fine sandpaper just to remove any tears from wild areas of the grain, and then I just soften everything off by hand just to finish everything off nice and smooth. So this holly here was from a tree that also grew in the client's garden. Now the clients were very keen to have this used as inlay for the tops. Now it wasn't ideal because the pieces were quite crudely cut on the bandsaw, which is very common. So I had to sort of figure out how I was going to try and turn this into inlay. So I used the speed sander to bring everything down to a given thickness, about 1.6 mil. And then very, very carefully cut them to about 5 mil wide on the rip saw. This was a slow and steady job, but it worked out alright. As you can see, there was quite a lot of worm in places, so I had to cut considerably more than I needed in the hope that I would be able to get enough out for the inlay. I'm cutting a 1.5 mil groove in the tops, and then just chiselling out the burn marks. These cutters never cut very cleanly, I'm afraid. And then it was just a case of choosing the best bits for the inlay and then gluing them in. Now there was a knot hole in one of the lids which I didn't want to leave open, so my method here is to take an offcut and to spoke shave it to fit on a taper, and then I can keep testing it and then trimming as necessary to get a lovely snug fit. Again, I'm using a very fine belt on the belt sander to bring the inlay down flush and to remove any traces of glue. Next was cutting the circular discs for the inlay. Now, ideally I would have much preferred to have had a thicker piece of holly to use, because then I could have used the plug cutter to give me several discs from that one plug. But that wasn't possible, so we just had to work with the thin material that we'd got. I'm gluing the discs in with super glue and activator, and I'm using this instead of PVA because I feel it's less likely to sink over time. I've routed these reveals to allow easy opening of the lids. I've also done the same reveal underneath the bottoms so that you can more easily pick the boxes up. After that, everything was wetted down with hot water to raise the grain, and once that was dry, it was all sanded back by hand with 320 grit paper. And then the final stage is oiling. Again, I'm using Odie's dark butter here. Now I'll go into how I apply Odie's in another video, but essentially you're applying a very small amount, rubbing it in extremely well with a white pad, and then allowing it to dry for 3/4 of an hour to an hour before thoroughly buffing everything off so there's nothing left on the surface whatsoever. One coat is usually enough, and I really like the visual qualities of an Odie's oil finish. Hope you've enjoyed the video and following the journey of making these boxes. I've certainly really enjoyed making them. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to sharing the next project with you.